The briefcase hit the table. Leather on mahogany, a sound like a door slamming shut. Every head turned. Lauren Armstrong stood 40 feet from her husband, briefcase open before her like evidence at a crime scene. Her hands were steady, which surprised her because she'd expected them to shake. "The $12 million, she said, and her voice came out softer than she'd planned, quieter, like she was sharing a secret. "The $12 million that Derek has been stealing from this company for 3 years. Derek's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. She watched the color drain from his face, watched his throat work around words that wouldn't come. His hand trembled, just slightly, before he set the cup down too hard, porcelain against saucer making a sharp crack in the silence. His voice broke and he swallowed, tried again. "That's absurd." But his fingers were white against the table's edge, knuckles pressed so hard they looked like they might split the skin. Lauren didn't move, just held his gaze across all that polished wood, all that carefully maintained distance. The briefcase sat open between her hands like a mouth waiting to speak. 3 years of evidence. 18 months of documentation. Everything he'd tried to hide. "Am I?" She tilted her head and the ghost of something, not quite a smile, touched her lips. "Because I also have the emails, the ones where you and Jade planned how to force me out. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you're watching from. We're building a community of story lovers." She paused and let the silence stretch thin and taut like a wire about to snap. "The recordings of your meetings with your lawyer, the ones where he told you exactly how to make me look incompetent." Another pause. The air in the room had changed, gone still and heavy with the weight of truth finally spoken aloud. "And the evidence of the affair, the one that started 2 years before you filed for divorce." Beside Derek, Jade's nails dug into the table and her other hand moved toward his arm. An instinct, quickly aborted. She pulled back and pressed her palm flat against her thigh instead, left a damp outline on the silk. No one spoke. 18 board members in leather chairs, 18 people who'd walked in thinking this would be simple. A vote, a removal, a foregone conclusion. Now papers rustled and someone's pen clicked in rapid succession, nervous energy filling the silence. Patricia Chun leaned forward, her reading glasses catching light. "Lauren," she said, and her voice was careful, measured. "What 12 million? Lauren opened the briefcase properly now, and the latches clicked with a finality that seemed to echo. She pulled out a binder, thick, bristling with colored tabs, and slid it down the table where it glided to a stop in front of the chairman. "Bank transfers," she said, still looking at Derek. "Shell companies. Falsified expense reports." Her fingers traced the binder's edge with the same precision she used to write code. All documented, cross-referenced, and verified by 3 independent forensic accountants. She pulled out more binders, 1, 2, 3, 4, and distributed them around the table with movements that felt rehearsed because they were. She'd practiced this in her apartment, had stood at her kitchen counter pushing coffee cups across the granite, learning the exact pressure needed to make them slide and stop where she wanted. Everything had to be perfect. Derek stood and his chair rolled back and hit the credenza with a dull thud that made someone flinch. "This is insane." His voice came out too loud for the space, too desperate, cracking at the edges. "You can't, she's making this up. Because I filed for divorce. Because she's—" "Sit down, Derek." The chairman's voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk, and Robert Harrison didn't raise his voice because 30 years on corporate boards had taught him that quiet authority always won. The look he gave Derek could have frozen water. Derek's mouth opened and closed like he was drowning in air. His knuckles were white against the chair back as he lowered himself slowly into the seat, and the leather creaked under his weight. Lauren pulled out her laptop, and the movement was unhurried, deliberate, like she had all the time in the world. She connected a cable to the port, and the screen behind her flickered to life, washing the room in blue light. Morning sun caught the display and made the numbers glow like they were radioactive. "So, Derek." She looked at him fully now, really looked at him across 40 feet of polished wood and broken promises. "You wanted this meeting. You wanted the board to vote on removing me from the company we built together." Her fingers moved across the keyboard and financial documents filled the screen. Rows of numbers and highlighted transfers and bank accounts that shouldn't exist. "Let's have that meeting," she said, and clicked again to reveal more documents, more evidence, more truth laid bare under fluorescent light and silent judgment. "But let's have it with everything on the table." 3 hours earlier. Lauren's hands shook as she poured coffee into the thermos. Hot liquid splashed over the rim and pooled on the granite, dark and spreading like blood seeking the lowest point. The apartment was too quiet. It had been too quiet for 8 months, ever since Derek moved out, ever since he'd served her divorce papers at the office in front of the entire engineering department, with Jade standing beside him like they were announcing an acquisition instead of ending a marriage. Her phone buzzed against the counter. Asterisk, everything's in place. You sure you want to do this? Asterisk. Marcus Webb, her private investigator, former FBI, the kind of man who'd seen enough corporate fraud to know when someone was being destroyed from the inside. Lauren's thumb hovered over the screen, and she thought about yesterday, about sitting across from Derek's lawyer in that sterile conference room while they outlined the divorce settlement terms like they were discussing a car lease instead of dismantling 15 years of her life. Ms. Armstrong, your client needs to understand that TechVista's value has declined significantly due to mismanagement in the CTO division, Derek's attorney had said, shuffling papers with the casual cruelty of someone who got paid by the hour. We're actually being quite generous with this offer. Derek had leaned back in his chair with his hands folded behind his head, and there was something in his eyes that looked almost like pity. It's for the best, Lauren. You were always better at code than business anyway. Lauren typed back with her thumb moving across the screen in short, decisive strokes. I'm sure. She grabbed the thermos and her laptop bag and the briefcase she'd packed the night before, each movement mechanical because if she thought too hard about what she was about to do, she might lose her nerve. Her reflection caught in the hallway mirror as she headed for the door, gray blazer, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked tired and she looked defeated and she looked exactly like someone who'd given up. Perfect. Int. TechVista Solutions, lobby, earlier that morning asterisk. The lobby of TechVista Solutions gleamed with the kind of corporate polish that screamed success in a language everyone understood. Int. TechVista Solutions, lobby, earlier that morning asterisk. The lobby of TechVista Solutions gleamed with the kind of corporate polish that screamed success in a language everyone understood. Exposed brick walls, carefully preserved from the building's warehouse days, mixed with chrome and glass in that calculated industrial chic that tech companies loved. The company logo dominated the back wall, a stylized mountain peak rendered in circuit board patterns. Lauren had designed that logo on her laptop 12 years ago, sitting in a coffee shop because they couldn't afford office space yet, and seeing it now, 40 feet tall and backlit with LEDs. Felt like looking at a photograph of someone she used to know. She signed in at security and the guard gave her a sympathetic smile. Big day, Ms. Armstrong? You could say that. She managed something that might have passed for a smile in return. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor took 43 seconds and Lauren counted them because she'd counted every time for the past 8 months, ever since Derek had made his move. 43 seconds to prepare her face, to steady her breathing, to remind herself why she was doing this. The doors slid open with a soft chime. Jade Patterson stood in the reception area scrolling through her phone, and she looked up when Lauren stepped out. For just a second, less than a heartbeat, something like guilt flickered across her features before it was gone, replaced by the cool professional mask she always wore. Lauren. Jade's voice dripped with false sympathy, with the kind of concern that was all performance. I'm so sorry it came to this. I hope we can keep things professional. Lauren studied her and took her time doing it. 29 years old, Stanford MBA, designer suit that probably cost more than Lauren's first car. Hair and makeup perfect even at 7:30 in the morning. The kind of woman who'd spent her whole life being underestimated and had turned it into a weapon. I'm sure we can, Lauren said, and shifted the briefcase to her other hand where the weight of it felt reassuring solid. Where's Derek? Already in the boardroom. He wanted to set up early. Jade glanced at the briefcase and then away, like looking at it too long might reveal something she didn't want to see. Do you need help carrying anything? No. Lauren met her eyes and held them. I've got everything I need. She walked past Jade toward the boardroom, and her footsteps were silent on the plush carpet. Behind her she heard Jade's phone buzz, heard her whisper urgently into it with barely controlled panic threading through her words. She's here. She looks. I don't know. Calm. Lauren allowed herself a small smile where no one could see it. Calm was exactly what she'd been practicing. Derek stood at the head of the conference table connecting his laptop to the presentation system, and he'd changed since they separated in ways that went beyond the obvious. Lost weight, started dressing younger in clothes that tried too hard. The navy suit was cut slim and European with no tie, the top two buttons of his shirt undone to show just enough chest hair to look casual. Calculated casual, magazine cover casual. The kind of casual that required a stylist. He looked up when Lauren entered and his smile was all teeth, sharp and white and aggressive. "Lauren, good morning." He gestured to the chair at the opposite end of the table, 40 feet away, the furthest possible distance in a room designed for collaboration. "I saved you a seat." "How thoughtful." She walked to the chair but didn't sit, just set her briefcase on the table instead and kept her hand on top of it like she was taking an oath. Board members began filing in with the energy of people who wanted to be anywhere else. Patricia Chin arrived first and gave Lauren's shoulder a quick squeeze as she passed, a gesture of solidarity that meant more than words. David Wong, the CFO, wouldn't meet Lauren's eyes as he took his seat. Sarah Martinez from Venture Capital looked uncomfortable, clutching her tablet like a shield against whatever was coming. 18 people. 18 votes. Derek needed 10 to remove her from the company. He had 11 locked down and Lauren had verified the count through Marcus's sources, through careful questions and strategic conversations. 11 board members who believed Derek's carefully constructed narrative, that Lauren was deadweight, that her technical skills had become obsolete, that she was holding the company back from its true potential. Robert Harrison, the board chairman, settled into his seat at the table's midpoint in neutral territory. He checked his watch, a vintage Rolex that had probably cost more than Lauren's annual salary when she and Derek were starting out, when they were living on ramen and dreams. "I believe we're all here." Harrison's voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed, someone who'd run companies and seen empires rise and fall. "Derek, you called this emergency meeting. The floor is yours." Derek picked up a remote and clicked it with a flourish. The screen behind him lit up with the TechVista logo, the one Lauren had designed, now being used as a weapon against her. "Thank you all for coming on short notice." He clicked again and a slide appeared. "Difficult decisions for a strong future" in bold letters. "I know this isn't easy. Believe me, it's not easy for me either. Lauren and I built this company together. We've been through everything together: marriage, success, growth." He paused and Lauren had to admire the performance, even as it made her stomach turn. His voice caught just slightly on that last word, and his eyes glistened like he might actually cry. "But sometimes," he continued, and his voice strengthened with manufactured conviction, "the people who help you start a journey aren't the right people to finish it. Sometimes loyalty to the past becomes a liability to the future." Another click. A new slide. Departmental performance, CTO division. Graphs appeared in aggressive red, lines trending downward like stocks in free fall. Budget overruns highlighted in yellow that hurt to look at. Project delays listed like criminal charges. The facts speak for themselves. Derek's voice took on a harder edge, the sympathy draining away to reveal something colder underneath. "Under Lauren's leadership as CTO, our technical division has become our weakest link. The Harrison project, $2 million over budget and 3 weeks late. Client satisfaction scores down 18%. Team morale at an all-time low." He looked at Lauren then, and his eyes were cold, empty of everything they used to hold. This was the Derek she'd come to know over the past 2 years, the one who'd emerged after success and ego had corroded everything soft inside him. "I don't want to do this," he said, and he almost sounded sincere, almost sounded like he meant it. "But as CEO, I have a responsibility to this company, to our employees, to our investors. TechVista deserves leadership that can scale, leadership that's focused on the future instead of clinging to the past." Jade entered the room then with timing that was too perfect to be accidental, sliding into the seat beside Derek with practiced grace. She gave the board an apologetic smile. "So sorry I'm late," and immediately pulled out her own laptop, the picture of professional efficiency. Derek clicked to the next slide. Proposal for restructuring. "I'm recommending that we remove Lauren Armstrong from her position as CTO and from the board, effective immediately." He let that sink in, let the words settle heavy in the air. "We'll offer her a fair buyout of her shares, 30% below current market value to account for the devaluation her department has caused, and a generous severance package." Patricia Chen's hand went up like she was back in school. "Derek, 30% below market value doesn't sound particularly generous. It's more than fair given the circumstances." Derek's tone sharpened into something that sounded almost like a threat. "The alternative is that we document every failure, every instance of mismanagement, every complaint from clients and employees and force her out with cause, which would leave her with nothing. The threat hung in the air like smoke, visible and toxic and impossible to ignore. Lauren watched it all from her end of the table. Derek's performance, the board members' reactions, Jade's supportive nods that came at exactly the right moments. She watched Derek's hand when he thought no one was looking, how it found Jade's under the table and squeezed with an intimacy that should have been private. She watched the small, triumphant smile that flickered across his face before he suppressed it, buried it under false concern. He thought he'd won. Harrison cleared his throat, and the sound cut through the tension like scissors through thread. Lauren, you've been silent through all of this. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Every eye in the room turned to her, and the weight of their attention was physical, pressing against her skin like hands. Lauren picked up her briefcase, and the latches clicked open with a sound that seemed too loud, too final, like a cocking gun. Not yet, she said quietly, and her voice was steady in a way that surprised even her. But I will. She pulled out the thick binder and set it on the table with that decisive thud that froze the entire room, stopped time, changed everything. Derek, you've made your presentation. Now I'd like to make mine. I think the board will find it very necessary. She paused and let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. Especially the part about the $12 million. 15 years earlier. Int. University of Washington Computer Lab. Night ****. The computer lab hummed with the sound of cooling fans and late-night desperation, a symphony of stressed processors and stressed students. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and cast everything in that institutional blue-white that made people look like corpses. Lauren sat at Station 12 with 3 empty Red Bull cans beside her keyboard, working through her advanced algorithms problem set while the code flowed from her fingers like music, clean, elegant, efficient in a way that felt almost natural. She'd always thought in code because it made more sense than words, followed rules that were logical and consistent, and didn't change based on emotion or context. Excuse me. She looked up, and a guy stood beside her station holding a laptop like it might explode at any second. Tall with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it, eyes red-rimmed from too much screen time and not enough sleep. Sorry to bother you, but... He gestured helplessly at his laptop with movements that were jerky and uncertain. You're Lauren Chin, right? Top of the class? I'm Derek Armstrong. I sit in the back. I know who you are. She did, and Derek was the one who asked obvious questions, who turned in assignments late, who seemed perpetually confused by concepts she found intuitive, almost basic. Right. Okay. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, uncertain in a way that seemed genuine. I'm completely lost on this recursion problem. My code keeps crashing, and I don't understand why, and the assignment's due in 6 hours, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to fail this class, and... He stopped and took a breath that sounded ragged. Sorry. I'm rambling. Can you just look at it? Please. Lauren saved her work with a quick keyboard shortcut and gestured to the empty chair beside her. Let me see. He sat and opened his laptop and pulled up his code, which was a mess. Inefficient loops, redundant variables, logic that circled back on itself like a snake eating its tail, like he'd learned programming from someone who didn't actually understand it. Okay, she said, and tried to keep the judgment out of her voice. First problem, you're thinking about this wrong. Story of my life. He laughed, but it sounded hollow, self-deprecating in a way that made her think he actually believed it. You're trying to solve the whole problem at once. Lauren grabbed a piece of scrap paper and started drawing boxes and arrows, breaking down the abstract into something visual. Recursion is about taking big problems and breaking them into smaller versions of the same problem. Like, she thought for a moment, searching for an analogy he'd understand. Like looking in a mirror that's reflecting another mirror. Each reflection is smaller, but shows the same thing. Derek leaned in and studied her diagram, and his expression changed, confusion shifting to understanding, clouds clearing to reveal sunlight. Oh! He sat back and his whole posture changed, shoulders relaxing. Oh, that actually makes sense. Now look at your code. She turned his laptop toward him and pointed at the screen. See where you're trying to do everything in one function? Break it down. Each function should do one small thing perfectly. They worked together for the next hour with Lauren guiding and Derek coding, stopping occasionally to ask questions that were getting progressively smarter, showing he was actually learning instead of just copying. You're good at this, Derek said finally when he saved his working solution. The teaching thing, I mean. You make it make sense when everyone else just talks in jargon. You're not bad at the learning thing. Lauren stretched and her spine cracked in 3 places. You just think too big picture. You need to focus on the small steps first. See, that's my problem everywhere, Derek said, and closed his laptop to turn and face her fully. I have these huge visions of what I want to build, but I can't figure out how to actually build them. I can see the end result perfectly. It's crystal clear in my head, but the middle. He gestured vaguely at the air between them. It's just fog. What do you want to build? His eyes lit up with an intensity that was almost startling, like she'd asked the one question he'd been waiting his whole life to answer. Okay, so you know how companies make decisions based on last quarter's data? They're always looking backward, right? Analyzing what already happened. What if we could build something that analyzes patterns and predicts forward? Not just what happened, but what's about to happen. What's inevitable if the patterns hold? Lauren felt something click in her mind. The same thing that happened when she solved a particularly elegant coding problem or found the bug that had been hiding for days. Predictive analytics, she said. Exactly. But actually useful, actually functional. Something that could work across industries, healthcare, retail, finance, anywhere patterns matter. You'd need massive processing power. Lauren was already thinking through the architecture in her head, seeing the structures and connections. And the algorithm would have to account for chaos variables, for the things that break patterns. But it's possible? Lauren thought about it seriously, about the math, the architecture, the sheer computing requirements, the elegant impossibility of it. Yeah, she said slowly, and felt the weight of that admission. It's possible. Difficult, but possible. Derek's smile could have lit the entire lab, could have powered every computer station from pure enthusiasm alone. Really? You think so? Because every professor I've talked to says I'm dreaming too big, that I don't understand the limitations. You are dreaming too big. Lauren pulled up a fresh document on her computer, and her fingers moved across the keyboard with purpose. But that's fine. We just need to break it into smaller problems that can actually be solved. She started typing, creating an outline. Component 1, data aggregation. Component 2, pattern recognition. Component 3, prediction modeling. Derek leaned forward, and his voice held something like hope, like disbelief that anyone would want to join him. Did you just say we? Lauren stopped typing and looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. At the exhaustion in his eyes and the desperation and the genuine spark of something brilliant buried under all that confusion and self-doubt. I mean, if you want, she said. You have the vision. I can build it. That's a partnership. Derek extended his hand across the desk space between them, formal and almost ceremonial in the fluorescent-lit computer lab at 3 a.m. Partners. She shook it and his grip was warm, firm, honest in a way that made her believe this might actually work. Partners, she agreed. Neither of them knew it then, couldn't have known it, but that handshake would become TechVista Solutions. It would become a marriage built on shared dreams and complementary skills. It would become a 12-year journey that would end with them on opposite sides of a boardroom table as enemies instead of allies, with everything they'd built turned into a weapon. But in that moment, in that fluorescent-lit computer lab at 3 a.m. with empty Red Bull cans and half-finished code, it was just 2 people who saw something in each other, something that felt like possibility. It was just a beginning. Int. TechVista Solutions Boardroom, present day, continuous ***. The $12 million, Lauren repeated, and her hand rested on the open briefcase like a promise she was finally ready to keep. The $12 million that Derek has been systematically stealing from this company for 3 years. Derek's coffee cup clattered against its saucer and brown liquid sloshed over the rim, spreading across the white tablecloth in a stain that looked like evidence, like proof of guilt. That's, his voice cracked and broke, and he cleared his throat, tried again, but his eyes darted to Jade, and then to his lawyer, and then back to Lauren like he was searching for an escape route that didn't exist. That's insane. You're making this up because I filed for divorce. You're trying to. Sit down, Derek. Robert Harrison's voice cut through the panic like a blade, clean and sharp and absolute. Derek's mouth opened and closed, and his fingers gripped the back of his chair with enough force to leave impressions in the leather. He slowly lowered himself back into the seat like a man accepting defeat before the battle had even started. Lauren pulled out her laptop with the unhurried calm of someone who'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind, who'd practiced every movement until it became muscle memory. She connected the cable to the presentation port, and the massive screen behind her flickered to life, washing the room in blue light. Shell companies, she said, and clicked to the first slide with a keystroke that felt final. 3 of them, specifically. Cascade Consulting Group, Apex Advisory Solutions, Summit Strategic Partners. Financial documents filled the screen. Incorporation papers, tax filings, bank account registrations, each one with Derek's name hidden in subsidiary ownership structures like he'd thought no one would ever look deep enough to find them. These companies don't exist, Lauren continued, and her voice remained level, almost conversational, like she was walking them through a software demo instead of destroying her husband's life and career. Well, they exist on paper. They have business licenses and tax ID numbers and professional-looking websites. But they don't have employees. They don't have offices. They don't provide any actual services. She clicked again and invoice after invoice appeared, each one for consulting services, strategic planning, market analysis. All billed to TechVista, all paid in full, all completely fraudulent. What they do have, Lauren said, and let the pause stretch, is Derek's signature on the incorporation documents. And bank accounts that have received $12.3 million from TechVista over the past 3 years. Patricia Chen grabbed her reading glasses and leaned forward to study the screen with the intensity of someone who'd just realized they'd been played. These invoices, they're all approved by. She stopped and looked at Lauren with something like horror dawning in her eyes. They're approved by you. Are they? Lauren's smile was razor-thin, sharp enough to cut. She clicked to a new slide and signature comparisons appeared side by side. On the left, Lauren's actual signature from legitimate company documents with its distinctive fluid loop on the N in Chun. On the right, the signatures on the shell company invoices that were similar but wrong, the loop missing, the pressure uneven, the forgery obvious once you knew what to look for. Forgeries, Lauren said simply. Very good forgeries. Derek must have practiced for weeks. David Wong, the CFO, was frantically scrolling through his tablet now, pulling up financial records with trembling fingers. His face had gone gray and his breath came in short, shallow gasps. Jesus Christ. These invoices all went through the automated approval system. We never caught them because they looked legitimate, because the signatures looked right. They were designed to look legitimate, Lauren said, and her fingers moved across her keyboard, pulling up a new document with practiced efficiency. Derek was very careful. Each invoice was just under the threshold that would require board approval. Each payment was timed to coincide with major client contracts, so they'd look like legitimate project expenses buried in the normal flow of business. This is bullshit. Derek surged to his feet again, but this time Harrison didn't stop him, just watched with the cold assessment of a judge who'd already reached a verdict. You're fabricating evidence. This is revenge because I'm leaving you, because I finally had the courage to. Am I fabricating this? Lauren clicked again with a keystroke that sounded too loud in the sudden silence, and a bank statement filled the screen, stark and damning. Cascade Consulting Group's primary account, with Derek Armstrong listed as the account holder, clear as day. Deposits from TechVista marked and dated. Transfers out to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, each one carefully structured to avoid detection, to slip under the radar of anyone not looking specifically for them. The room went silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and someone's quick, panicked breathing that sounded like they were hyperventilating. Jade's hand had moved to her throat and her fingers pressed against her collarbone like she was checking her own pulse, making sure she was still alive. Her eyes were fixed on the screen and something was shifting in her expression. The slow, dawning realization that she'd bet everything on the wrong horse, that the man beside her wasn't the genius she'd thought he was. Derek. Robert Harrison's voice was quiet now, which somehow made it more threatening, more absolute. Is this true? Have you been stealing from your own company? Derek's chest rose and fell rapidly and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the boardroom's perfect climate control, despite the expensive air conditioning that kept everything at exactly 70 degrees. This is taken out of context. These were legitimate business expenses. The offshore accounts are for tax purposes. Completely legal tax optimization. Nothing about this is legal. The voice came from the back of the room, unexpected and authoritative. Everyone turned and a woman stood in the doorway. 50s, steel gray hair pulled back severe, navy suit that screamed federal authority, carrying a briefcase that made Lauren's look small and insignificant. Who the hell are you? Derek demanded, but his voice had lost its edge, turned thin and desperate. Margaret Fisher, FBI Financial Crimes Division. She pulled out her badge and held it up for the room to see, the gold shield catching light and throwing it back. Mr. Armstrong, you need to stop talking immediately. Anything you say from this point forward can and will be used against you in a court of law. The color drained completely from Derek's face, and he looked like he might vomit, like his body was rejecting the reality of what was happening. He gripped the table edge to steady himself. FBI. Jade's voice came out as a whisper, barely audible over the air conditioning. Her hand dropped from her throat to grip the table edge, nails digging into the wood hard enough to leave marks. Why is the FBI here? Agent Fisher walked into the room with the confident stride of someone who'd done this 100 times before, who knew exactly how this would play out. She set her briefcase on the table with a thud that seemed to punctuate everything, to mark the moment when this stopped being corporate drama and became criminal investigation. Mrs. Armstrong contacted our office 6 weeks ago with evidence of wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement, she said, and looked at Lauren with something like respect, like professional recognition. We've been building our case since then. She did most of our work for us, frankly. Very thorough documentation. Patricia Chin was staring at Lauren like she'd never seen her before, like the woman she thought she knew had been replaced by someone entirely different. You brought in the FBI? I brought in everyone I needed to bring in. Lauren closed her laptop, but she didn't sit down, didn't break the moment. Forensic accountants. Digital security experts. Corporate fraud investigators. I've been documenting Derek's theft for 18 months, every transaction, every falsified document, every lie told in boardrooms just like this one. She pulled out another binder from her briefcase, this one thicker than the first, with FBI evidence tags attached like official seals on important documents. Every invoice. Every transfer. Every falsified signature. She slid it across the table toward Agent Fisher with a smooth motion that looked practiced, rehearsed. Including communications between Derek and his attorney discussing strategies for hiding assets during our divorce, planning how to defraud me and this company simultaneously. Derek's lawyer, a sharp-suited man named Gordon Mitchell who'd been silent until now, probably calculating his own liability, started shoving papers into his briefcase with panicked, jerky movements. My client requires separate representation. I'm not qualified for criminal defense, and I need to. Running somewhere, Gordon? Lauren's voice stopped him mid-motion like she'd pulled his strings. That's interesting, because I also have recordings of you advising Derek on how to commit fraud, specific conversations about how to structure the shell companies, how to forge my signatures. Something about attorney-client privilege not covering criminal conspiracy. Gordon went very still, frozen like he'd just realized he was standing on a trap that had already been sprung. Agent Fisher smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile, wasn't warm or reassuring or anything that might offer hope. Mr. Mitchell, I think you should stay right where you are. We'll need to ask you some questions, and it would be better for everyone if you cooperated from the start. 12 years earlier. Int. Lauren's apartment, living room, night ***. The apartment was tiny, a studio in a building where the heat only worked intermittently and the neighbors played their music too loud through paper-thin walls. But rent was cheap, which meant every dollar saved was a dollar they could pour into the business, into making their shared dreams something real instead of just code on a laptop screen. Lauren sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by printouts of code that covered every available surface like snow, her laptop balanced on a cardboard box that served as a makeshift desk. Derek paced behind her with his phone pressed to his ear, making his 5th investor pitch of the day after 4 rejections that should have discouraged him but somehow hadn't. Yes, sir, I understand your concerns about market saturation, Derek said, and his voice was confident despite the rejection he'd already received, despite having heard no so many times that morning. But what we're offering isn't just another analytics platform. This is predictive modeling that actually works, that actually delivers on the promise. Real-time pattern recognition across multiple data streams with accuracy that's never been achieved before. He met Lauren's eyes across the cluttered room, and she held up her laptop screen where the demo was ready. 6 months of coding distilled into 3 minutes of interface perfection. 6 months of her life reduced to something that could be explained to people who didn't understand how it worked. Derek's expression shifted, and excitement broke through the professional pitch voice like sun through clouds. Actually, sir, what if I showed you right now? I could send over a demo, Just 3 minutes of your time to see what we've built. Lauren watched him work, and she'd learned Derek's patterns over the past 3 years. The way he translated her technical language into compelling narratives that investors could understand. The way he read people and adjusted his pitch accordingly, like he was performing instead of presenting. The way he never gave up even after rejection that would have broken most people. He was good at this part, at the performing and the persuading and the selling of dreams to people who had money but no vision. She was good at making those dreams real, at turning his impossible ideas into actual code that worked. That's yes, sir. Tomorrow at 2? Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. Derek ended the call and let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, pure relief mixed with disbelief. He wants a meeting. Lawrence fucking Bishop wants a meeting. Bishop Investments? Lauren's head snapped up and code forgotten. She stared at him. Derek, that's there. Huge. They're huge. Series of funding. Real money. He dropped onto the floor beside her, and energy crackled off him like static electricity, like he couldn't contain what he was feeling. Lauren, this could actually work. We could actually build this thing, make it real instead of just something we talk about. She looked at the code on her screen, thousands of hours of work, countless late nights. Every skill she'd ever learned poured into elegant algorithms that could see patterns in chaos, that could predict what came next when everyone else was still trying to understand what had already happened. We've already built it, she said quietly. Now we just need people to believe in it. Derek took her hand and his palm was sweaty with nervous energy, but his grip was steady and warm. I believe in it. I believe in you. We, Lauren corrected and squeezed his hand back. I believe in us. He kissed her then, sudden and impulsive and tasting like the cheap coffee they'd been living on for weeks, like hope and exhaustion and the kind of desperation that comes from wanting something so badly you can taste it. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears, or might have been just pure, unfiltered hope made visible. Marry me, he said. Lauren blinked, and the words took a moment to register, to make sense. What? Marry me. Not now, obviously. We're broke and living in this shoebox and eating ramen 4 nights a week. But someday, when this works, when we make it work. His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, unconscious and intimate. I want to build this company with you. I want to build a life with you. I want everything with you. Lauren looked at him, really looked at him, and saw someone who believed in impossible things, who thought code and dreams could change the world, who looked at her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. Okay, she said, and felt the word change everything. Okay. He sat up straighter, like he hadn't actually expected her to say yes. Okay, yes. You're saying yes. I'm saying yes. She smiled and it felt real, felt like something she could build a future on. Someday, when we're not broke, when we've built something that matters, when we're not living on coffee and code and sheer stubbornness, yes. Derek pulled her into a hug that nearly knocked the laptop off its cardboard perch, and they sat there on the floor of that tiny apartment surrounded by printouts and empty coffee cups and the detritus of their shared ambition. The neighbors' music thumped through the walls and the heat kicked on with a rattle that sounded like the building was dying. But none of it mattered because they had each other, and they had a dream, and they had a meeting with Lawrence Bishop tomorrow at 2. It felt like the beginning of everything. And it was just not the everything they thought. Int. TechVista Solutions boardroom, present day, continuous ***. Derek sat in his chair like a man who'd forgotten how to move, how to breathe, how to exist in a world where consequences finally caught up with him. Agent Fisher opened her briefcase with efficient movements and pulled out a folder marked with official FBI seals and classification stamps. Mr. Armstrong, we have warrants for your arrest and seizure of all TechVista financial records, personal devices, and any materials related to Cascade Consulting Group, Apex Advisory Solutions, and Summit Strategic Partners. She slid a document across the table, and it stopped directly in front of Derek, who stared at it like it was written in a language he didn't understand. You're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Fisher's voice was professional, matter-of-fact, like she was reading a weather report instead of ending someone's life. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, I can afford an attorney, Derek said, and his voice came out hollow, defeated. I can afford the best attorneys in the country. Not with frozen assets, you can't. Fisher pulled out another document, and this one was a court order, already signed by a federal judge. As of 6 a.m. this morning, All accounts associated with you, with Jade Patterson, and with your shell companies have been frozen pending investigation. Every offshore account, every hidden asset, everything Mrs. Armstrong documented is now in federal custody. Jade made a sound that was almost a whimper, small and broken and desperate. I didn't know about the offshore accounts. Derek told me everything was legal, that the consulting companies were. Ms. Patterson, I'd advise you to stop talking. Agent Fisher's expression didn't change, but something in her tone suggested she'd heard this song before. This claim of ignorance that never quite rang true. We have recorded conversations of you coaching Mr. Armstrong on how to falsify documents, how to time the fraud to avoid detection. You're not a victim here. Jade's face crumpled and mascara started running down her cheeks in dark streaks that looked like war paint melting. She looked at Derek with something that might have been betrayal, or might have been just the realization that she'd destroyed her entire career for a man who couldn't even protect himself, let alone her. Derek didn't look back at her, just kept staring at the warrant like if he looked long enough, the words might rearrange themselves into something that didn't destroy him. Patricia Chun was the first board member to break the stunned silence. "Lauren," she said, and her voice was soft with something like awe, something like respect she hadn't shown before. "How long have you been planning this?" 18 months, Lauren said, and closed her briefcase with a click that sounded final, definitive. "Ever since I found Derek's notebook in his office outlining his plan to force me out, to devalue my shares, to take everything we'd built and make it his alone." She looked around the table at 18 faces showing various degrees of shock and guilt and uncomfortable recognition of their own complicity. "You all believed him," she said quietly. "You believed every lie he told about my incompetence, every fabricated complaint, every falsified performance metric. You were ready to vote me out based on evidence you never questioned, numbers you never verified, because Derek was charming and confident and you wanted to believe him." Robert Harrison removed his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose like he'd aged a decade in the last hour. "Lauren, I apologize. We all apologize. We should have. You should have asked questions," Lauren said, and there was no anger in her voice, just a bone-deep weariness that came from fighting alone for 18 months. "You should have wondered why the CTO who built this company's entire technical infrastructure suddenly couldn't do her job. You should have noticed that every failure Derek attributed to me coincided with decisions he made without consulting me." She paused and looked directly at Derek, who still hadn't moved, who looked like a statue of his former self. "But you didn't ask questions because Derek was good at telling you what you wanted to hear. He was always good at that." 2 federal agents entered the boardroom then, uniformed and official, and Agent Fisher gestured toward Derek. "Mr. Armstrong, please stand and place your hands behind your back." Derek stood slowly, and his movements were mechanical, robotic, like he was operating on autopilot while his brain tried to catch up with reality. The agents moved to either side of him, and one pulled out handcuffs that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Is that really necessary?" Derek's lawyer, Gordon Mitchell, finally found his voice, though it came out weak and uncertain. "He's not a flight risk. He'll surrender voluntarily. Given the offshore accounts and international financial ties, Mr. Armstrong is absolutely a flight risk," Fisher said, and nodded to the agents who cuffed Derek's wrists behind his back with practiced efficiency. "Ms. Patterson, you'll need to come with us as well for questioning." Jade stood on shaking legs and her designer heels clicked against the floor as she walked toward the agents, and she looked back at the boardroom. At the life she'd been building, at the position she'd thought was secured, at the future that was evaporating like morning fog. Derek was led toward the door, and he finally looked at Lauren, really looked at her for the first time since this all started. His eyes held something that might have been regret, or might have been just shock that she'd beaten him, that the quiet wife he'd underestimated had destroyed him so completely. "I loved you," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "I know you don't believe that, but I did. Once. Before everything got so complicated." Lauren met his gaze and held it, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, calm, final. "If you'd loved me, Derek, you wouldn't have stolen from our company. You wouldn't have planned to destroy me. You wouldn't have brought your mistress to a meeting where you tried to take everything I'd built." She paused. "What you loved was the idea of me, the brilliant coder who made your dreams real while asking nothing for herself. But I'm not that person anymore." "Who are you now?" Derek asked, and he sounded genuinely curious, like he was seeing her for the first time. "Someone who fights back," Lauren said simply. The agents led Derek and Jade out of the boardroom, and their footsteps echoed in the hallway. growing fainter until they disappeared completely. The door closed with a soft click that seemed louder than it should have been, more final. The remaining board members sat in stunned silence, looking at each other like they weren't sure what to do next, what to say, how to process what they'd just witnessed. Agent Fisher stayed behind, and she pulled out a business card, slid it across the table to Robert Harrison. "We'll need access to all company financial records, all communications between Mr. Armstrong and company officers, all documents related to the shell companies. The sooner we get cooperation, the better this goes for TechVista as an entity." "TechVista didn't know about the fraud," Harrison said, and he sounded defensive, protective of the company even as it fell apart. "We're victims here too." "That remains to be determined," Fisher said, but her tone suggested she believed him. "Mrs. Armstrong's documentation makes it clear that the fraud was isolated to Mr. Armstrong and Ms. Patterson, but we'll need to verify that through our own investigation. In the meantime, I'd suggest you figure out your leadership situation quickly. Your investors are going to have questions." She nodded to Lauren with professional respect, and then left, following the path Derek and Jade had taken, leaving the board to sit with the wreckage. Patricia Chun was the first to speak, and her voice was quiet, thoughtful. "Lauren, what do you want to happen now?" Lauren took a breath, and it felt like the first real breath she'd taken in 18 months, like she'd been holding it this whole time, waiting for this moment. "I want what's best for TechVista. This company has 200 employees who depend on us for their livelihoods, who have families and mortgages and lives built on the assumption that we know what we're doing. Derek's actions have put all of that at risk." She looked around the table at faces that were starting to show understanding, starting to see her differently. "We need to act fast," she continued, and her voice took on the decisive tone of someone who'd been planning for this moment. "Immediate forensic audit of all finances to identify any additional fraud we haven't found yet. Full disclosure to investors and major clients before they read about this in the news. Recovery of stolen funds from offshore accounts with FBI assistance. Complete cooperation with the federal investigation." David Wong was taking notes on his tablet, fingers moving quickly. "That's all necessary, but Lauren, we have a bigger problem. We don't have a CEO. We don't have a COO. We need leadership immediately, or this company collapses." Robert Harrison leaned back in his chair and studied Lauren with the assessment of someone who'd spent decades evaluating leaders, who'd seen companies rise and fall based on who stood at the helm. "Lauren, we need someone to step in as CEO immediately. Someone the investors will trust, someone who knows this company inside and out, someone who's just demonstrated remarkable strategic thinking and ethical standards." All eyes turned to her, and the weight of expectation was physical, pressing against her shoulders like hands. Lauren shook her head slowly. "I never wanted to be CEO. I wanted to code. I wanted to build things, solve problems, create elegant solutions to complicated questions. That's what I'm good at. But you're also good at leadership," Patricia Chin said gently. "You've just proven that. You saw a problem, you documented it, you built a case, and you executed a plan that protected this company and its employees. That's what a CEO does." Lauren thought about Derek making decisions without her input, about being excluded from strategic planning, about watching the company they'd built together become something she didn't recognize. She thought about the junior developers who looked up to her, about the technical team that still came to her with their hardest problems, about the code that still needed to be written and the products that still needed to be built. "Temporary," she said finally. "I'll do it temporarily, until we stabilize, until we hire someone whose passion is leadership instead of coding. 6 months maximum." "6 months is better than nothing," Harrison said, and looked around the table at the other board members. "All in favor of appointing Lauren Armstrong as interim CEO?" Every hand went up, unanimous, without hesitation, a stark contrast to the vote they'd been about to take an hour ago. "Motion passes," Harrison said. "Lauren, the company is yours to lead. God help us all." Lauren smiled despite everything, despite the exhaustion settling into her bones, despite knowing that the next 6 months would be brutal. "First order of business. Company-wide meeting at 2 p.m. Everyone needs to hear what happened from us before they hear it from the news or the rumor mill." She stood and picked up her briefcase, and the weight of it felt different now, lighter, like she'd been carrying this evidence so long it had become part of her, and now that she'd finally used it, she could let it go. "Second order of business," she continued. "We call our biggest clients personally, and we're honest with them. We tell them what happened, we tell them what we're doing about it, and we give them the option to walk away. Some will. Most won't if we handle this right. Patricia Chin nodded approvingly. What's third? Third, Lauren said, and looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at Seattle's skyline, at the city where she and Derek had built their dream before it became a nightmare. We make sure this never happens again. We implement oversight, separation of duties, checks and balances. We build the company we should have built from the beginning. She walked toward the door and then turned back to face the board one more time. And we remember that companies are built by people, not by charismatic CEOs who think they're above the rules. TechVista isn't Derek Armstrong's company. It never was. It's everyone's company. Every developer who writes code, every client who trusts us with their business, every employee who chose to work here. That's what we're going to protect. 3 months later. Int. TechVista Solutions, Lauren's office. Afternoon ***. Lauren's office looked different than Derek's had been, and the changes were deliberate, intentional, a statement about what kind of leader she intended to be. The massive executive desk was gone and replaced with a simple table she could gather people around. The walls that had been covered with awards and magazine covers featuring Derek now held whiteboards covered in code and flowcharts and technical diagrams. A row of plants lined the windowsill because someone had told her that living things made offices feel less sterile, more human. She sat at the table with her laptop open, reviewing code from the development team, and she was wearing jeans and a TechVista t-shirt because she'd decided that interim CEOs didn't have to wear suits if they didn't want to. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Webb. Asterisk verdict came down. Derek got 15 years. Jade got 7 with possibility of parole after 4. Feds recovered $9.8 million of the $12.3 million. Still tracking the rest, asterisk. Lauren read the message twice and tried to feel something. Satisfaction, maybe, or vindication, or the sweet taste of justice served. Instead, she just felt tired and sad and like she'd lost something she could never get back, even though what she'd lost had turned out to be an illusion anyway. She typed back, asterisk thank you for everything. Send me your final invoice, asterisk. A knock on the door pulled her attention up, and Patricia Chin stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. Thought you could use this. You've been in here since 6 a.m. Is it really that late? Lauren checked her watch and was surprised to find it was after 3. Time moved strangely when you were absorbed in code, contracted and expanded in ways that had nothing to do with clocks. Patricia set 1 coffee cup in front of Lauren and settled into the chair across from her. The investors' call went well. They're satisfied with the recovery plan and impressed with our transparency. Stock price is stabilizing. That's good, Lauren said and wrapped her hands around the warm cup. What about the FBI investigation? Agent Fisher says they're wrapping up. No evidence of fraud beyond Derek and Jade. The company is clear. Patricia paused and studied Lauren over the rim of her own cup. You did it, Lauren. You saved TechVista. We all saved it, Lauren corrected. The development team kept shipping products while this was happening. The client services team maintained relationships. Everyone pulled together. Because you gave them something to believe in, Patricia said quietly. You showed them that doing the right thing matters, that truth matters, that integrity isn't just a word we put in mission statements. Lauren took a sip of coffee, and it was good, better than the cheap stuff she'd survived on for years. Derek got 15 years. I just found out. Patricia's expression didn't change. How do you feel about that? I don't know, Lauren admitted. He stole from us. He tried to destroy me. He deserves to face consequences for what he did. But he also used to be someone I loved, someone I believed in, someone I thought I'd spend my life with. So I feel complicated. That's probably healthy, Patricia said. The alternative is feeling nothing, and that would mean he damaged you more than he actually did. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, drinking coffee and watching the afternoon light shift across the office walls. I've been thinking about your 6-month timeline, Patricia said finally. You said you'd only stay as interim CEO until we found someone permanent. And Lauren set down her cup and met Patricia's eyes. I think you should stay, Patricia said. Not forever if you don't want to, but longer than 6 months. You're good at this, Lauren. Better than you think. Better than Derek ever was, honestly, because you actually care about the company instead of just your own ego. Lauren shook her head slowly. I miss coding. I miss solving technical problems instead of strategic ones. I miss building things with my hands instead of delegating. So code, Patricia said simply. Who says a CEO can't spend time in the development trenches? Who says you have to follow Derek's model of leadership? Make the job fit you instead of trying to fit the job. Lauren thought about that, about the possibility of building a different kind of leadership, about being CEO in a way that felt authentic instead of performative. I'll think about it, she said, which wasn't a no. Patricia smiled and stood, picking up both empty coffee cups. That's all I ask. Now go home. It's Friday afternoon, and you've been working 80-hour weeks for 3 months. The company won't collapse if you take a weekend. After Patricia left, Lauren packed up her laptop and grabbed her jacket, but she didn't leave immediately. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out at Seattle's skyline, at the city where she'd started this journey 15 years ago in a university computer lab. She thought about Derek in a federal prison somewhere, about Jade facing her own consequences, about the wreckage of their lives scattered behind them. She thought about the 18 months she'd spent gathering evidence, about the fear and determination that had carried her through, about the moment when she'd finally fought back. And she thought about the question that had been nagging at her since the verdict came down, the question she couldn't quite answer. Was it justice or was it revenge? She'd told herself it was about protecting the company, about saving the employees, about holding Derek accountable for real crimes he'd actually committed. And all of that was true. But it was also true that she'd enjoyed watching him fall, that she'd felt something dark and satisfying when the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, that some part of her had wanted him to hurt the way he'd hurt her. Did that make her like him? Did that make her someone who'd been corrupted by the same ego and pride that had destroyed Derek? Or did it just make her human? Someone who'd been betrayed and chose to fight back, someone who'd been underestimated and proved everyone wrong, someone who'd been hurt and refused to let that hurt define her? Lauren didn't have an answer, and maybe that was okay. Maybe the question mattered more than the answer. Maybe the fact that she was still asking meant she hadn't lost herself completely, hadn't become the kind of person who destroyed others without conscience or regret. She picked up her bag and headed for the door, but she paused at the threshold and looked back at the office, at the whiteboards covered in code, at the plants growing in the window, at the simple table where she'd made decisions that saved a company and destroyed a marriage. 6 months ago, she'd been someone who thought in code and avoided conflict. Someone who'd let Derek take credit for her work because partnership meant more than recognition. Someone who'd believed that quiet competence would be enough. Now she was someone different, someone who'd learned to fight, someone who'd discovered that silence could be strategy instead of submission, someone who'd turned her technical precision into a weapon that cut through lies and exposed truth. She wasn't sure which version of herself was better, but she knew which one had survived. And maybe that was enough. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and turn on your notification so you're the first to receive our new videos. Make sure to share this story with a friend or loved one if you enjoyed it.